how could a simple mosquito bite change the course of a family's life forever? It's a question that no one expects to ask in a modern hospital. Yet it was the silent reality creeping into the life of one woman on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas, during the humid summer of 2022. Her name was Elena Martinez, a 38-year-old mother of 3, who worked as a school librarian. She was not a doctor, not a scientist, and not someone who ever thought about obscure viruses. She thought about her children's homework, the next book club meeting, and her husband's late shift at the fire department. Yet, one summer evening, a buzzing insect pierced her skin, and from that moment forward, her life began spiraling into a medical mystery that her doctors couldn't, or wouldn't, see. At first, Elena brushed it off. A mosquito bite was hardly worth a thought in Texas. Everyone had them. She dabbed some ointment on the red mark on her arm and moved on. But within days, she began to feel the creeping signs of exhaustion that seemed heavier than usual. It wasn't just tiredness, it was the kind of fatigue that pulled at her bones and fogged her mind. She thought maybe it was just the stress of summer school and juggling 3 kids at home. Then came the headaches. Not the dull ache of dehydration or the pressure of sinus trouble. These were sharp, piercing headaches that made her squint even in dim light. By the end of the week, she found herself struggling to climb the stairs in her own home. Her legs felt heavy, her coordination slightly off. She told herself it was probably the flu. Or maybe COVID. Although her test came back negative. But as she sat in the waiting room of her local urgent care, Elena could feel something was wrong. Her hands trembled as she filled out the paperwork. She listed her symptoms: headache, fever, fatigue, muscle weakness. The nurse called her back, checked her vitals, and gave a sympathetic nod. "Looks like a summer flu," the nurse said. "You'll be fine with rest and fluids." That answer should have comforted Elena. But it didn't. Something inside her whispered that this wasn't just the flu. The fever burned too hot, the headache felt too sharp, and the weakness in her arms and legs felt unnatural. She asked the doctor directly, "Could it be something else?" He smiled, almost dismissively. "Unless you've traveled abroad recently, I don't think you need to worry about anything exotic. Just get some rest." What Elena didn't know was that at that very moment, health officials in her county were quietly tracking a rise in cases of West Nile Virus, a disease spread by infected mosquitoes. The virus, first discovered in Uganda in 1937, had been creeping through the United States for decades, often flaring up in hot, wet summers. By 2022, Texas had seen hundreds of cases, some leading to paralysis, brain swelling, and even death. The symptoms were well documented: fever, headache, body aches, joint pain, vomiting, diarrhea, or rash. In severe cases, the virus could invade the nervous system, leading to encephalitis, brain swelling, or meningitis, inflammation of the brain's lining. But because most people showed no symptoms at all, or only mild flu-like illness, doctors often overlooked the danger. Elena had never even heard of West Nile virus. And her doctor didn't bring it up. That night, her fever spiked to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. She woke drenched in sweat, shivering and disoriented. Her husband Luis urged her to go back to the hospital. She resisted, insisting the urgent care doctor had said it was just the flu. But by morning, she could barely stand. At the ER, things grew more complicated. A different physician reviewed her chart. "Your white blood cell count is slightly elevated," he explained, "but nothing alarming. We'll keep you hydrated and monitor you." Again, no mention of mosquito-borne illness. As Elena lay in the hospital bed, she thought about the mosquito bite from 2 weeks earlier. She even mentioned it to the nurse, who gave a sympathetic smile but didn't write it down. It seemed impossible to her that something so small could be causing this storm inside her body. Yet, the truth is that one bite from an infected mosquito can carry enough viral particles to hijack the immune system, traveling through the bloodstream, and in rare cases, breaching the blood-brain barrier. By day 3, Elena's symptoms escalated. Her headache turned into blinding pain. Her speech slurred. Her right arm twitched uncontrollably. These were not flu symptoms. They were neurological red flags, signs of neuroinvasive West Nile virus. Still, the doctors hesitated. They ran blood work for common viruses. They ordered a CT scan to rule out stroke. But the words, West Nile, didn't appear in her chart. It wasn't negligence out of malice. It was negligence out of blind spots, assumptions, and the quiet habit of overlooking what doesn't scream obvious. Meanwhile, outside hospital walls, local health officials were issuing mosquito control warnings. Spraying trucks rolled through neighborhoods. News stations aired brief segments about avoiding dusk and dawn when mosquitoes were most active. The information was there, but Elena, lying in her hospital bed, had never heard it. And her doctors didn't connect the dots. So what exactly should have been done? If Elena's providers had thought of West Nile virus earlier, they could have ordered a specific blood test to detect viral antibodies or genetic material. While there's no cure, early detection matters. Patients can receive supportive treatment, close neurological monitoring, and interventions to prevent complications. Instead, Elena's condition was left to progress without a name, without a clear plan. Her husband grew frustrated. "Why aren't you doing more?" he demanded of the staff. The doctors repeated their cautious script. "We're running tests. We're monitoring her closely." But Elena's children saw their mother fading. She who once read them bedtime stories could barely lift her head to speak. Her daughter Sophia clutched her hand and whispered, "Mom, please don't leave us." In those quiet moments, the weight of neglect wasn't just medical. It was human. The failure to consider one possibility left an entire family caught in fear. West Nile virus thrives in silence. 8 out of 10 infected people never develop symptoms. But for the unlucky ones like Elena, it can strike with devastating force. The risk factors were clear. People over 50, those with weakened immune systems, or underlying health conditions. But even younger, healthier adults weren't immune. Elena was 42, outside the highest risk group, but not safe. The tragedy was not only in her suffering, but in how preventable much of it was. Mosquito control measures, personal protection like repellents in clothing, and community awareness could drastically reduce cases. And yet, year after year, new patients walked into hospitals where West Nile virus was an afterthought. If you've ever experienced a misdiagnosis, or felt ignored by a healthcare system that brushed off your symptoms, share your story in the comments. And if you want to uncover more hidden medical truths like Elena's, subscribe to White Coat Secrets. For Elena Martinez, the days following her hospital admission blurred into a haze of pain and confusion. What began as headaches and fatigue was now evolving into something far darker. Something her family could see but her medical team seemed unwilling to name. By the 4th night, Elena could no longer feed herself. Her hands shook violently and words tumbled out of her mouth broken and slurred. Her husband Luis stood helpless at her bedside, pressing the call button over and over, demanding attention. "She's worse," he insisted to the attending physician. "This isn't just the flu. Look at her." The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're monitoring her vitals. Sometimes viral infections just take time." But time was the one thing Elena didn't have. Inside her body, the West Nile virus was no longer confined to her blood. It had crossed into her nervous system, inflaming delicate brain tissue, triggering seizures, and threatening permanent damage. The warning signs were all there. Fever, severe headache, weakness, tremors, confusion. These were textbook symptoms of neuroinvasive West Nile virus, a rare but dangerous complication. Yet doctors hesitated because it was uncommon, easy to dismiss, and not top of mind. Why? Because most people infected with West Nile virus, about 80%, never show symptoms at all. Of the remaining 20%, most experience only mild illness. Fever, rash, fatigue. Only about 1 in 150 cases become severe. But for Elena, rare was real. The disease doesn't discriminate, but risk factors raise the stakes. People over 50, those with diabetes, cancer, kidney disease, or weakened immune systems are more likely to develop severe complications. Elena wasn't elderly, but she had a history of mild autoimmune issues, something that could have made her more vulnerable. On the 5th day, Elena's body convulsed violently. The hospital staff rushed in, alarms blaring. Her chart suddenly looked different in their eyes. The dismissive tone was gone. She was no longer just a woman with the flu. She was now a patient in neurological distress. This shift forced the team to expand their scope. Finally, one young infectious disease resident suggested what no one else had dared to say. Could this be West Nile virus? There was silence in the room. Then murmurs. Finally, a nod from the attending. It was a breakthrough moment, but a delayed one. Blood samples were sent to the state laboratory for antibody testing. The doctors explained to Luis that the results would take days. Days that Elena didn't have. Unlike strep throat or influenza, which can be detected within minutes, West Nile virus requires specialized blood tests that measure IgM antibodies or detect viral RNA. Few hospitals run these tests on site. Most must send them out, waiting while patients deteriorate. In Elena's case, the delay felt like a cruel joke. Her family wanted answers. Instead, they were told, "We suspect West Nile virus, but we can't confirm yet." Luis wanted to scream. "What do you mean suspect? You're supposed to know." The doctor's face hardened. "There's no specific antiviral treatment. Even if we confirm it, supportive care is all we can provide." Supportive care. Two words that sounded so weak in the face of Elena's suffering. It meant 4 fluids, pain management, anti-seizure drugs, and constant monitoring. No cure. No magic pill. Just time, and the strength of her body to fight back. To understand why Elena was deteriorating, her family needed to know what was happening inside her body. The West Nile virus is part of the flavivirus family, related to yellow fever, Zika, and dengue. Once injected into the bloodstream by a mosquito, the virus invades cells and multiplies. In most people, the immune system clears it quickly, leaving little more than mild flu-like symptoms. But in rare cases, the virus sneaks past the brain's defenses, crossing the blood-brain barrier. Once inside, it triggers inflammation that can destroy nerve cells, leading to encephalitis, swelling of the brain, or meningitis, inflammation of the protective membranes. That's what was happening to Elena. Every seizure, every moment of confusion, every weakness in her arms and legs was the virus carving its presence into her nervous system. At Elena's bedside, her children whispered prayers. Her son, Mateo, drew a picture of their family on construction paper and taped it to the wall. Stick figures smiling under a bright sun. He didn't understand the medical jargon, but he knew his mother was slipping away. Luis sat through the night, searching his phone for anything that could help. That's when he stumbled upon health department warnings about mosquito outbreaks in their county. West Nile virus cases had been climbing for weeks. Why hadn't their doctors connected it sooner? He read about prevention. Wearing long sleeves, using insect repellents with DEET, draining standing water, avoiding outdoor activity at dawn and dusk. He thought back to their neighborhood barbecue where Elena had been bitten. They hadn't used repellents. The kids had played outside until the sun dipped below the horizon. They hadn't known. Now, knowledge came too late. West Nile virus is not contagious between people. You can't catch it from touching or hugging someone infected. The only real risk is through mosquito bites, blood transfusions, organ transplants, or very rarely, from mother to child during pregnancy or breastfeeding. That means prevention is everything. Communities that invest in mosquito control programs, spraying insecticides, treating water sources, and educating residents, see fewer cases. Individuals who take precautions drastically reduce their risk. For Elena's family, prevention was a lesson learned in the harshest way. There is no cure. No vaccine for the general public. Doctors can only keep patients hydrated with 4 fluids, control fever and pain, treat seizures with medication, use ventilators if breathing becomes impaired, monitor brain swelling with imaging and supportive interventions. Some experimental treatments, like interferon therapy or intravenous immunoglobulin, have been tried in critical cases, but none are proven or widely available. For families like Elena's, the phrase supportive care feels like a death sentence. But sometimes, it's enough. Many patients recover with rest, time, and resilience, though some are left with lasting damage. As the days wore on, Elena drifted between consciousness and delirium. Some mornings she recognized her children. Other times, she stared past them, mumbling incoherently. Luis begged the doctors for hope. "We're doing everything we can," they said. But hope was fragile. On the 9th day, the lab results returned. Positive for West Nile virus. The diagnosis was official. The relief Luis felt was mixed with anger. Relief at having an answer, anger that it came so late. Elena's chart now carried the weight of a name. The staff moved with more urgency, treating her as a critical case rather than a puzzle they didn't want to solve. But the damage was already done. If knowledge is power, then silence is the enemy. And silence had nearly cost you with this. Have you ever underestimated the bite of a mosquito, thinking it was harmless? Tell me in the comments if this changes how you'll protect yourself and your family. And don't forget, subscribe to White Coat Secrets for the truths medicine too often leaves unspoken. When the virus finally loose on its grip, it didn't feel quiet. Elena Ramirez survived, but she wasn't the same. After 9 harrowing days in the hospital, she was stable enough to be intensive care. The fever had broken, the seizures were under control, and she could finally open her eyes without slipping back into delirium. For Luis and the children, it felt like a miracle. But miracles often come with scars. The first time Elena tried to sit up, her body betrayed her. Her arms trembled violently, unable to support her weight. Her legs felt like sandbags, heavy and unresponsive. When she tried to speak, her words came out slurred, like a language she didn't fully know anymore. Luis leaned over her bed, holding her hand. "It's okay, mi amor. You're here. That's all that matters." Tears slid down her cheeks, not just from relief, but from fear. She knew something was wrong. This wasn't her body anymore. The virus had left fingerprints on her nervous system. Fingerprints she might carry forever. What Elena was experiencing wasn't unusual. Severe neuroinvasive West Nile virus can leave behind a trail of long-term complications. Muscle weakness and paralysis, sometimes permanent. Chronic fatigue that lingers for months or years. Memory problems and difficulty concentrating. Depression and anxiety triggered by both neurological changes and trauma. Parkinsonian symptoms in rare cases, like tremors and stiffness. Doctors call it post-viral syndrome. A cruel reminder that surviving the virus doesn't always mean escaping it. For Elena, the most immediate battle was her legs. Physical therapists explained that the inflammation in her spinal cord had damaged the nerves controlling movement. With rehabilitation, she might walk again. Or she might always need assistance. No one could guarantee. Twice a day, therapists worked with Elena, coaxing her muscles to remember what they once knew. They strapped resistance bands to her arms, guided her through simple stretches, and celebrated when she managed to stand, just for a few seconds, without collapsing. The effort left her exhausted. Some days she wanted to give up. "I used to run after my kids in the park," she whispered to Luis. "Now I can't even walk to the bathroom." Luis squeezed her hand. "We'll run again. One day." But even he didn't fully believe it. For Mateo and Sofia, watching their mother's struggle reshaped childhood innocence. They no longer thought of mosquitoes as annoying summer pests. To them, mosquitoes were monsters. At school, when classmates complained about bug bites, Mateo would say, "Be careful. Mosquitoes can make you really sick." His friends laughed, until their teacher pulled him aside, gently asking why he seemed so serious. When he told her about his mother, she stopped laughing too. Soon, the Martinez family story spread beyond their home. Parents whispered about it during soccer practice. Neighbors started dumping out flower pots filled with water. Someone organized a community meeting with the local health department. Elena's suffering became a lesson for everyone. At that meeting, residents learned what had always been there in the background but rarely discussed. West Nile virus is seasonal in many regions, peaking in late summer and early fall. Mosquitoes breed in standing water, even in tiny amounts like a bottle cap. Simple measures, like wearing long sleeves, using repellents, and fixing torn window screens, can drastically reduce risk. Elderly and immunocompromised individuals are the most vulnerable. Hearing these facts, people wondered why they hadn't been better warned before. Why did it take a neighbor's tragedy for awareness to spread? Physical weakness was only half the fight. The other half lived in Elena's mind. She struggled with nightmares of the hospital. Alarms blaring, doctors muttering, her children's frightened faces. She replayed the missed opportunities for early diagnosis, the dismissive tone of doctors before they took her seriously. One afternoon she asked Luis, "What if they had acted sooner? Would I be like this now?" Luis didn't answer. He couldn't. Post-viral depression and PTSD are rarely discussed, but they are painfully real. Survivors often feel abandoned, angry, or guilty. Elena wasn't just healing her body. She was healing her trust in medicine, in life itself. Doctors later admitted that Elena's case had been a wake-up call for the hospital staff. Too often, they defaulted to common diagnoses: flu, migraine, stress, without considering emerging infectious threats. One physician confided to Luis, "We don't see severe West Nile virus every day. It's easy to miss." But your wife reminded us we can't afford to dismiss patient symptoms. It was a rare moment of humility in a system that often hides its mistakes. By the 6th week of rehabilitation, Elena made progress. She could shuffle a few steps with a walker. Her speech became clearer, her memory sharper. The children cheered when she walked across the living room for the first time. Slow and shaky but determined. It wasn't the sprint she once knew, but it was victory. Elena's ordeal forces us to ask, how prepared are our healthcare systems to recognize less common but dangerous diseases? Do we, as individuals, take prevention seriously, or do we wait until tragedy strikes? What role should communities play in reducing risks? Individual households. The answers are uncomfortable but necessary. Public health experts stress that prevention is the only true weapon against West Nile virus. Imagine if neighborhoods collectively drained and used swimming pools, treated storm drains and gutters, used mosquito nets where screening isn't possible, spread awareness before peak season, not after tragedies. Each small action reduces risk. Together, they can prevent entire outbreaks. For the Martinez family, prevention became personal. Luis started speaking at community centers, sharing Elena's story. "We thought mosquitoes were just a nuisance," he told crowds. "Now we know better. Don't wait to learn the hard way like we did." Elena, though still recovering, joined him. Sitting in her wheelchair, she reminded people, "I'm alive, but my life is different now. Don't let this happen to your family." Her voice shook, but her message was powerful. Because for every Elena who survives, there are others who don't. And too often, their silence is filled by the hum of mosquitoes, carrying secrets medicine still struggles to confront. So I ask you, if a single mosquito bite can change a life forever, how will you protect yours? Don't forget to share your thoughts below, and subscribe to White Coat Secrets. The truth deserves to be told, before silence takes another voice. The first time Elena returned home, the house felt unfamiliar. The children had drawn bright crayon posters that read, "Welcome home, Mama," and taped them on the walls, but the air was thick with silence. She could see how much had changed in her absence. Bills piled on the kitchen counter. A wilted plant she once watered every morning sagged in the corner. Even the couch seemed harder, as though time had rearranged the familiar. She eased into the armchair with Luis's help, her legs trembling under the weight of their own memory. For a moment, she looked around as if searching for proof that she still belonged here. But belonging was not the same as returning. Life had moved forward without her, and she had to relearn her place in it. Her recovery was fragile. Each step with the walker felt like stepping into a new identity. No longer the woman who chased her kids in the park, who cooked dinner while dancing to old salsa records. Now she was a patient masquerading as a mother, a survivor who still carried the virus's shadow in her veins. Neighbors came by with casseroles and cautious smiles, whispering their relief. They called her lucky. Elena hated that word. Lucky would have meant never lying in a hospital bed while her children wondered if she'd wake up. Lucky would have meant doctors recognizing the signs before her body broke down. What she felt was not luck. It was survival with scars. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, the television hummed with the governor's press conference. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "State urges residents to take mosquito precautions as West Nile cases climb." Elena's fork froze in her hand. The governor spoke with measured calm, promising enhanced mosquito control efforts and public awareness campaigns. But Elena knew these words were a performance, rehearsed and detached. She had never seen a flyer in her neighborhood, never heard a warning before her illness nearly killed her. Awareness came too late, as it always did. Luis muttered under his breath, "Now they care." The children looked from their father to the screen, unsure of why his voice carried so much bitterness. But Elena understood. Her body was living proof of a government that preferred to react after tragedy, rather than prevent it. Weeks passed, and Elena pushed herself through therapy. She practiced standing, practiced walking, practiced smiling even when her muscles ached with betrayal. She longed to return to work, to prove that the virus had not stolen her purpose. But when she called her employer, the conversation was brief. Her position had been filled. There was sympathy in the manager's voice, but sympathy doesn't pay rent. Elena hung up the phone with her heart heavy. The virus had not only crippled her body, it had stolen her independence. She felt the walls of her home closing in, turning comfort into confinement. At night, she scrolled through news articles. Stories of others, an elderly man in another county who died after days of fever, a teenager hospitalized with meningitis, a woman who suffered strokes. Some families spoke out, demanding better mosquito control, better surveillance, better urgency. Others stayed silent, buried under grief. One article struck her most. Doctors admit West Nile virus often misdiagnosed in early stages. She read how overwhelmed hospitals missed signs, how government funding for vector control had been slashed year after year, how health systems only scrambled when cases surged. Elena saw her story reflected in every paragraph. She wasn't an isolated case. She was a symptom of a larger sickness, a society unwilling to invest in prevention until the cost became unbearable. One afternoon, Luis wheeled her into a community forum at the local library. Health officials in neat suits presented slides of mosquito breeding cycles and control strategies. They spoke about surveillance systems, about spraying programs, about public engagement. But when residents asked why neighborhoods like theirs had no proactive warnings, the officials stuttered, shuffled papers, and redirected. Elena raised her hand, her voice shaky but steady enough. I almost died because no one thought it could happen here. Doctors told me I was stressed, or had the flu. My children watched me convulse because no one warned us this virus was real. How many others will it take before you act before, not after? The room went quiet. The officials nodded politely, promised improvement, and moved on to the next slide. On the ride home, Elena felt both proud and hollow. Speaking her truth didn't change the machinery of bureaucracy, but it planted something in the people around her. She could see it in the way neighbors looked at her now, not with pity, but with recognition. At home, Sophia climbed into her lap, careful not to press too hard against her mother's fragile body. Mama, will you get better forever? She asked. Elena stroked her daughter's hair, searching for an answer she didn't have. I'm trying, she whispered. Recovery was not a straight path. Some days she walked across the room without the walker. Other days she collapsed halfway and wept in frustration. The virus was gone, but it had left a map of weakness inside her. She began to understand that healing wasn't about returning to the old Elena. It was about learning to live with the new one. Luis carried his own burdens silently. Bills pressed harder, hours at work stretched longer, and sometimes she caught him staring into space, jaw tight with exhaustion. He had nearly lost his wife. Now he was losing pieces of himself to the weight of holding everything together. One night, Elena woke to find him sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands. She wheeled herself to him. You're breaking too, she said softly. He looked up, eyes red. I don't know how much longer we can do this. The silence between them was heavy. Not because love was absent, but because love was stretched to its limits. Meanwhile, the state announced a new initiative. Increased spraying, more testing of mosquito pools, public service announcements. The press celebrated the effort as decisive leadership. But in the Martinez home, it felt like theater. The virus had already swept through lives, already left scars. What they were offering was too little, too late. Elena began keeping a journal, chronicling her days, her progress, her anger. She wrote not just for herself but for others who might one day face the same silence, the same dismissal, the same near death. If they won't remember us in their policies, she wrote, then I'll make sure they remember in our stories. Her words carried the bitterness of experience, but also the seed of transformation. Because Elena Martinez had discovered something the system never expected. Survival gave her a voice. And she intended to use it. The first time Elena stood at a podium, her body betrayed her. Her legs trembled, her palms sweated. Her voice cracked like it might disappear altogether. But the room was filled with expectant faces. Neighbors, survivors, parents, and a few local reporters who came more out of curiosity than conviction. Folding chairs creaked as people leaned forward, coffee steam curling from paper cups. Luis sat in the front row with their children. Sophia perched on his lap, Mateo gripping his father's hand with restless curiosity. They were her anchor, and when she looked into their eyes, she found the courage to speak. I was told it was stress. I was told it was the flu. I was told to go home and rest. But West Nile virus nearly killed me. The silence thickened, the audience pinned to her words. Elena paused, letting the quiet underscore what she had endured. She took a breath and pressed on. By the time it was recognized, it was almost too late. And the truth is, if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. Her words landed with a force that statistics never could. She wasn't a graph or a percentage. She was flesh, blood, and memory. She was a face that hospitals had nearly overlooked. The applause afterward was hesitant at first, then steady, a ripple of acknowledgement that grew stronger as others rose to their feet. Louise's eyes glistened with pride. Her children looked at her as if she had been remade, as if this woman standing tall at a microphone was not just their mother but something larger. Someone who could bend her pain into purpose. That night, Elena lay awake replaying every word. Speaking out had awakened something in her, but also unsettled her. Advocacy was a calling, but it was also a burden. And then she read about Carlos Rivera. His name appeared in a newspaper article buried between politics and sports, his photo grainy, his smile almost fading into the print. He was 55, a school janitor, known for keeping the hallways polished and humming songs as he worked. His fever started in July. His headaches worsened. His confusion deepened. Doctors insisted it was pneumonia. By the time they tested for West Nile virus, it was too late. He never left the hospital. His daughter was quoted in a single line. He kept saying something was wrong, but they didn't listen. Elena folded the newspaper carefully, her chest tightening. Carlos was her, only without the reprieve. His voice had been dismissed. His body abandoned until it gave up. His story ignited her grief and her rage. She began speaking not just for herself, but for him. When she was invited to a public health conference, she stood before officials in crisp suits, laptops open, badges pinned to their chests. She felt out of place in her plain dress, her walker by her side. Yet when she began, her voice held no hesitation. "I am not here to speak in statistics," she said. "I am here as proof. Delayed recognition kills. I survived, but Carlos Rivera did not. And he is not the only one." Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others typed notes furiously, perhaps out of guilt. A few approached her afterward, whispering their gratitude, confessing that they too overlooked the virus in their patients until it was too late. Elena realized then that advocacy was not about moving mountains in one speech. It was about planting seeds that officials could not easily ignore, seeds that would sprout in the spaces where conscience outpaced bureaucracy. But the more visible she became, the more weight she carried. Strangers found her email and sent their stories. Grandmothers left unable to walk, teenagers battling seizures, fathers buried too soon. Each message was a wound reopened, but she read them all. To ignore them felt like betrayal. Luis noticed the toll. "You're taking too much on," he warned one night as she typed until dawn. "If not me, then who?" she whispered, her fingers stiff over the keys. Still doubt haunted her. Could one woman's voice alter a system designed to move slowly? Could grief carve its way into action against the indifference of institutions? Her path grew heavier when she met Carlos Rivera's daughter at a town meeting. The young woman clutched a framed photo of her father, her hands trembling. They sat together, speaking in hushed tones, their tears blurring into one. "They keep calling it rare," the daughter said bitterly. "But it doesn't feel rare when it's your whole world." Elena gripped her hand. "That's why we keep talking. Because silence lets them pretend it doesn't matter." Together, they began organizing vigils, writing letters, demanding awareness campaigns in communities most at risk. They were often brushed aside, called emotional, anecdotal, even disruptive. But they persisted. At times, progress felt microscopic. A single city allocated funds for mosquito spraying. A hospital added West Nile virus to its triage checklist. But Elena understood now. Advocacy wasn't about instant transformation. It was about persistence, about refusing to vanish, about making ignorance harder and harder to defend. Yet advocacy was not only a battle with governments and hospitals, it was a battle within herself. She wrestled with survivor's guilt, with exhaustion, with fear that her own health might falter again. Nights were long, dreams uneasy. But each morning, when she saw her children racing into the sunlight, she remembered why she fought. Their laughter was proof that survival wasn't just her own victory. It was their inheritance. On the anniversary of her hospitalization, she returned to the park where it began. The air buzzed with the sound of insects, just as it had that summer. She sat on the bench where her body had first betrayed her. Her children ran through the grass, Sophia's laughter carrying across the field, Matteo chasing after her with wild energy. Luis sat beside her, their hands intertwined. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she replied. "But you're here." She nodded. She was here. But Carlos was not. Nor the grandmother, nor the farmer, nor the others whose stories she carried like sacred burdens. She realized then that survival had not been the end of her story. It was the beginning of her responsibility. When she rose from the bench, she did so without her walker. Her steps were slow, unsteady, but purposeful. She had been nearly silenced. Now she spoke not just for herself, but for those who could no longer. And as she looked back at her children, their laughter dancing through the air, she reflected at morals woven from her journey. Silence is deadly. When symptoms are dismissed, when patients are told it's just stress, lives are lost. Listening saves lives. Every statistic is a human life. Numbers may feel small, but to the families left behind, one life lost is an entire world erased. Health systems must move faster than tragedy. Prevention and recognition cannot wait until after death makes headlines. Advocacy is born from survival, but it thrives in persistence. Change rarely happens overnight, but one voice refusing to be silenced can ripple across institutions. True healing is not only personal. It is collective. Elena's recovery found its deepest meaning not in regaining her strength, but in fighting for others. Subscribe to White Coat Secrets, where shocking true stories of medical neglect, misdiagnosis, and prejudice are exposed for the next episode. Meanwhile, leave your comment, like and share this episode. I'll absolutely love to read from you. Cheers!